Hello there friends and welcome. Today we have another very fun Elden Ring guide. And it is my easiest, if not most powerful build yet. Perfect for beginners. It's a character that combines everything good all in one, with amazing offenses and defenses. You'll have not only life stealing on every single hit, with passive regeneration, amazing hit points and extreme damage negation against all types, so that you can face tank even the DLC bosses, while still retaining incredible offensive potential, capable of unleashing a non-stop onslaught of attacks that can shred some of the toughest bosses in the game in seconds, or even better, a hyper armor boosting skill that can easily stance break any boss in the game, including the final DLC boss, in just 3 uses, for free critical hits of course. Actually 2 strikes even if the boss is weaker stance-wise, like Dear Malenia, lying flat on the ground like a pancake. As a matter of fact, you even get to stun bosses out of their ultimate moves, talk about fun. And the best part is the basics of your build can already be acquired even at the very early game. So this character is a blast to play no matter where you are at. The beginning, middle, end, or the DLC of course. So without further ado, let us get into our life-stealing, regenerating, critical hit spamming, full armor tank. And well, you are essentially carried by 2 amazing Ashes of War, both of which can be found even at the beginning of the game. The first is Wild Strikes. When you activate this, so long as you keep the button pressed, you'll keep on spamming your attacks all around you, for very little stamina and also FP cost. While it doesn't provide you with hyper armor during the animations, it will constantly refresh your poise score, which means a lot of enemies will have a very tough time staggering you out of your non-stop Wild Strike onslaught. It is especially useful when combined with weapons with status on hit, such as of course Bleed, as you can apply it super fast by virtue of the non-stop attacks. Second, you attack quite fast even when using two-handed weapons, which is amazing for poise breaking the enemy. Lastly, by virtue of having a life-stealing weapon, it will also proc its regeneration properties on every single of your fast attacks. To put it simply, Wild Strikes can carry you far, and is especially useful for dealing with multiple enemies, or enemies that don't have very high poise damage, so they don't stagger you quite often, which does include bosses like Malenia, and even the DLC's Relana. You can just melt them extremely fast by spamming your Wild Strikes. Unfortunately, Wild Strikes is not quite so good against enemies that stagger you easily, but for them, we have another very special Ash of War. Lion's Claw. This Ash of War will send you somersaulting forwards, striking the enemy from above. It deals very high damage, but the best part is, unlike your Wild Strikes, Lion's Claw does possess the super rare and quite powerful Hyper Armor property for most of its casting animation. To put it simply, 99% of enemy attacks, including most bosses' attacks, including the DLC, will not be able to stagger you out of this at all. Just be careful with grab moves. Most importantly, when combined with big weapons like hammers, the poise damage is also out of this world. What this means is, after every 3 uses of Lion's Claw, unless you delay it by a lot, which is not really an issue because you have hyper armor, so it's easy to spam it, you will stance break even bosses, even on the DLC, in just 3 uses. Stance breaking the enemy or breaking their guard is of course amazing because, well, the boss will drop down to the ground, which leaves them open for a critical hit for a nice amount of damage, and also leaves you with a recovery window time for, well, flasks, buffs, or anything else you want. Most normal enemies, on the other hand, will be completely pancaked into the ground, so we can follow it up with a heavy jump attack. Lion's Claw is essentially the easiest way of handling a lot of the DLC bosses as a strength-based character. Because of its unique hyper armor, you can just keep on spamming it, and every 3 times, the enemy is instantly guard broken and open for a critical hit. Don't forget that once their poise is broken, you can even stun them out of their ultimate moves, even grab attacks. It's also especially funny when you knock a boss out of their second phase special attack, like Commander Gaius. So if you thought critical hits were dead after the tragic flame of the Red Main's nerf, well, Lion's Claw still remains unnerfed and is amazing. Anyways, let's get into our ultimate weapon now, the Great Star's Great Hammer. This weapon is one of the most versatile weapons in the game actually, and quite unique because it will restore your hit points on every single hit, for around 1% on every strike, including multi-hit strikes from Ashes of War and so on. When you combine this with your Wild Strikes ability, you'll constantly regenerate hit points. With Lion's Claw, it's not as fast, but because Claw is constantly stunning the enemies, it's still amazing. And since you'll be stacking our hit points to the max, higher than 2500, 1% will mean a lot. As I mentioned before, you can find the Great Stars very early, you can just rush for it even at the beginning of the game. And in my previous lifesteal guide that I've linked here, you can check the location step by step. Since I've already done that, let's just keep it short and simple now. Great Stars is also amazing for its secondary property. It already has built-in blood loss built up. When combined with Wild Strikes, enemies will bleed very fast. There are some other gear choices that I'll mention in the gear section. Alright, now let us cover how to properly level our face-tanking Vampiric critical character. First I'll do the complete stat allocation, and later a small section on how to do it step by step if you're playing this build from the start. But anyways, 60 vigor is essential. Having a healthy pool of hit points is one of the reasons of why you can face tank even late game enemies. Strength is also very important to increase our damage, as you'll be going with the heavy scaling for full strength potential. 60 is good enough. You can also increase this to 80 if you prefer, for extra damage, but only if you have the points to spare. 10 Arcane is essential for one of our weapon buffs, as I'll explain later in the spell section, and for that we also need Faith. As a matter of fact, 25 Faith is where I would stop, as it will let you cast all of the best Faith buffs to be fair, including the damage negation and extra damage potential ones. The same for extra regeneration. You can increase it to 30 if you prefer, for the Black Flame Protection spell, which is the highest source of physical damage negation. It's just that nowadays it's been nerfed, and will also reduce all of your healing sources, including on hit and regeneration, by 20%, which is kind of annoying for this character, who is all about restoring hit points automatically. Plus you can always eat the boiled crabs for a similar effect, lower but similar enough. So 25 is a good stopping point. 14 Dexterity will help you use one of the best weapons for buffing, which is the Grafted Greatsword, as I'll soon explain. After that, it's mostly between Mind and Endurance. Why increase Mind? Honestly, because Lion's Claw, the Ash of War, costs a lot of FP, not so much for Wild Strikes. And running out of FP while spamming Lion's Claw against a boss, well, it will increase your chances of dying by a lot. Although you can always recover FP during their critical recovery section. 20 to 25 is ideal, I'd say. It provides you with a healthy amount of FP for Lion's Claw spammage. Besides that, it's just Endurance. Lion's Claw costs a lot of stamina, but it's easy to recover because even while you're getting hit in battle, you're still recovering stamina. So I wouldn't really rush for it. And when it comes to equipment load, as always, just use the Winged Crystal Tier effect for your special Flask. But once you have the points to spare, unless you want to dump them all into Strength for 80, for the best scaling on your weapon, you have the luxury of spending more points into Endurance if you prefer. You can even go up to 80 Vigor, but there's diminishing returns. Still, the more hit points, the better for this character. Now, what if you were playing this character from the very start? So how to allocate your points then? Well, first, grab 22 Strength to qualify for our Great Stars weapon. After that, 10 Arcane and 12 Faith for our best weapon buff, Bloodflame Blade. Then I would start increasing Vigor, just for some extra safety early on. 20 is a good spot, but you can go as high as 30 before the very high levels. After that, you might as well start increasing either your strength if you want higher damage, but you can always stance break bosses through Lion's Claw anyways for huge damage through a critical. And something fun you can do is get 14 Dexterity plus 27 strength, as it will qualify you for two-handing. The Grafted Greatsword weapon has one of the best self-buffs in the game, and you can combine it with the Great Star's hammer. Anyways, increase either strength for more damage or vigor for more hit points and defenses now, until you hit the threshold we covered before. And don't forget Faith until 25 for some buffs. If you want to have them earlier or not, well, it's your preference. I'd rather have them earlier, because some of them are really good. Now let us cover the best gear options for our FACETANK Vampiric Critical Spammer. I'll first do a complete endgame section, but after that, just like the level up section, I'll cover the best gear to rush for early. Anyways, for weapons, it's of course a heavy Great Stars, we already covered that, either with Lion's Claw or the Wild Strike's Ash of War. As I explained before, it's also in your best interest to get the Grafted Blade Greatsword. Its Oath of Vengeance unique ability is one of the best self-buffs in the game. By activating it, you will increase all of your stats by +5, all of them, physical and mental. This will last for 1 whole minute, which is plenty. Before bosses you can just prebuff, and even during boss battles, you have the boss's second phase as a way of doing this again, because it's cast very fast. Of course you want to immediately switch to your Great Stars afterwards, because the buff will still remain in effect. Another reason it's so good. There's actually a secondary benefit of increasing all of your damage negation, just look at that, 88 against physical, but this lasts for a very short time, so it's already over. The stat buff, however, is for a whole minute. Don't forget that despite its huge 40 strength requirement, so long as you have around 27 strength, you can use it even early by two-handing it, which will qualify you for the sword, just to use the buff of course. Then switch back to the Great Stars. Something else you can do is grab the Commander's Standard for its very powerful Rallying Standard buff, which is essentially the same as the Golden Vow spell, but with shorter duration and higher power. This is only if you don't want to bother getting the Golden Vow spell at 25 faith, but remember it has lower duration. Still, you will qualify for it by virtue of having high strength and the 14 dexterity that is the same for the Grafted Sword Blade anyways. Now what about our shields? Even if this character isn't meant to block, rather you're face tanking, it still helps to have shields. First, the Icon Shield. It's one of the very few items that provides innate hit points regeneration. And the good thing is, if you two-hand your Great Stars weapon and put the shield at your back, you will still benefit from the regeneration. So it's a great item to rush for early. However, for the toughest bosses in the game, at the very least the final boss of the DLC, the Fingerprint Stone Shield is still a tremendous help. Mostly because, well, at the very least 2 attacks of the final boss, they are better blocked than face tanked, because it's super easy to block them. Even with 86 guard boost without any other source of extra abilities to empower your shield, it will still be enough. Also, whenever using your Lion's Claw, you two-hand your weapon automatically, so it's not like it will cost you damage by having the shield on the other hand. Plus, you can just quickly block the enemy's attacks when needed. This is also good for Melania's special attack, although you can face tank it. It's just, why would you face tank it if you can block and not take any damage, is what I'm saying. So basically the Icon Shield, and later the Fingerprint Stone Shield for the toughest bosses. Now, what about the Verdigris Great Shield, which has higher guard boost? It is not recommended because you cannot change its Ash of War, which means it will clash with your Great Stars, Lion Claw, or Wild Strikes. I suppose you could always two-hand the Great Stars for the effect, but then whenever you wanna block an attack, you'll have to manually unhand it and get the shield back. Well, unless you have the reflexes of a ninja, I don't think that's quite possible during boss battles. Second, you'll also want a Sacred Seal to cast all of the powerful faith buffs for more damage, damage negation, and regeneration. Honestly, the starter Finger Seal is more than enough. Sadly, while we do have a seal that scales with strength, it won't increase the damage effect of Blood Flame Blade, unfortunately. So just go with whatever you want, because you won't really be using the seal for damage spells. So the incantation scaling won't matter, it doesn't change duration. Now what about armor? Ideally, you want the toughest, tankiest armors possible, So for the main game, the Bow set, and the DLC, the Verdigris set. Verdigris is very similar to Bow, it's just that it has slightly higher slash and pierce resistance. I suppose most bosses tend to have slashing weapons or pierce rather than bludgeoning. Once again, even if it will make you encumbered, you have the Winged Crystal tier Flask effect to overcome that during boss battles. Now, Talismans are very important, and this build actually has a lot of options. It's quite versatile, so depending on if you want more defenses or more offensive potential. The first, however, is a must-have regardless, the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. It will increase your physical damage negation by an enormous amount. Most enemies still have physical as their biggest damage component, including the DLC bosses. It's just that they often also deal minor elemental damage on top of physical, but physical is the most dangerous of them all. So this is a must-have. If you want to face tank, you need it. Second, the Shard of Alexander can be quite good if you want to increase your damage to the max, as it increases the power of your Ashes of War, especially for Lion's Claw. Besides that, I'm rather fond of the new Crimson Ember Medallion +3 because it is the highest source of hit points increase, at least as far as gear. For example, by having it, we'll go from 2375 to 612, quite a big increase. Besides that, you have a slot for even higher damage negation if you want, such as the Golden Braid, the new item for the highest holy negation, which is great against the final boss. Actually, both the main game and the DLC final boss. But you also have individual variants of the other best talismans, like Flame Drake for fire and so on. They are quite good, but it mostly depends on if the boss is using a lot of elemental damage or not. You still have a lot of other options. The Blessed Dew Talisman, for example, can be found very early and provides you a stacking source of hit points regeneration. So yes, it will stack with the Icon Shield and some Faith buffs. While it is nice, for the DLC bosses, it's not gonna cut it because the effect is very small, so I'd rather something else. For the main game, however, especially during normal exploration, it's pretty good. You can also use Airtree's Favor for more hit points, but the effect is nowhere as strong as the Crimson Ember Medallion +3. The Assassin's Crimson Dagger can also help, as whenever you get a critical, you will restore your hit points. The effect is not that amazing, unless you're using weapons like daggers, which can proc it twice, but at least for the final boss of the DLC, who has enormous damage, it can help. For normal exploration, stuff like the Ritual Shield Talisman for extra defenses, when you are at full hit points, or Ritual Sword for higher damage can help, because it's easy to recover the damage against normal enemies. Against bosses, not really, because you'll always be taking some damage anyways. Godskin Swaddling Cloth can also help, especially if you're using your Wild Strikes, because you'll quickly and constantly regenerate hit points. For higher damage, the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and the Lord of Blood Exaltation are also great picks. Better if using Wild Strikes, because you'll then hit the enemy a lot and cause more bleed. For Lion's Claw, I don't think they're that necessary. You can even go with the Dagger Talisman for higher critical damage. After all, every 3 strikes of Lion's Claw equals a critical. Oh, and I almost forgot, but the Taker's Cameo is also a good choice for normal exploration to restore hit points whenever defeating enemies. Boss battles, not really, it's useless. So as I've just explained, you have a lot of options for your talisman selection. I would definitely always recommend you keep at least Dragon Crest Great Shield, and also Ember Medallion +3. The other ones, as I said, are up to you if you want more damage negation or more actual damage. Usually the highest the boss damage, so the final boss of the DLC, the more I'd recommend you go with defensive options like Golden Braid instead. Now what about consumables? Boiled Crab is the best by far, because it will highly increase your physical damage negation. It doesn't stack with the Black Flames Protection spell, has somewhat of a lower effect, but at least it won't reduce your healing and regeneration. Plus you can buy it an infinite amount of times anyway, it's pretty cheap. Great for hitting before boss battles. Now let's do a quick section on early game gear, so what you rush for if you're just beginning the game with this character. First, the Great Star's weapon, of course. It's a must-have for the character. You can rush for it even without fighting the first main story boss. Then the Grafted Blade Great Sword, as I mentioned before, so long as you have 27 strength, you can two-hand it to properly activate its buff, then switch back to Great Stars. The Icon Shield for passive regeneration, any seal you want. Any armor types as well, I mean Banished Knight is easy to farm early. For Talismans, be sure to rush for Radagon, +5 to all of your physical scores is busted early. And well, the damage negation penalty doesn't matter, at least early and mid-game. After that, you might as well go for the Blast Duel Talisman for passive regeneration, which helps a lot when exploring. Don't forget you can also rush for Boiled Crabs for physical damage negation. For spells, so long as you have 12 Faith and 10 Arcane, go with Bestial Vitality for regeneration. Flame Grant Me Strength requires 15 Faith, but is good also for buffing. But the most important one is Blood Flame Blade, of course, for uber damage. And that's pretty much it. Well, besides your Ashes of War, of course, both Lion's Claw and Wild Strikes are very easy to find early. Now let us cover our spells, which are very important for this build. First, Golden Vow. It's one of the best sources of extra damage and damage negation in the game, and lasts for a very long time. Second, either Blessing's Boon, or, earlier, or if you don't want to increase your faith past 12, Bestial Vitality. Both will provide you with lots of extra regeneration. They won't stack, however. The third spell is a defensive buff. I have Black's Flames Protection here, but as I said, you don't have to get it if you don't want. The crabs are enough. Other than that, it will depend on what type of elemental damage the boss deals, so Lightning, Holy, Fire are the most common in the DLC. Just remember, these are body buffs that will clash, so you can only have one. Either physical negation from the crab or Black Flame, or one of the elemental damage negation types. Last but not least, we have our Blood Flame Blade. It's amazing, grants you lots of extra bleed, damage, you can't go wrong with it. It's also a reason why I didn't infuse my Great Stars with something else, because you then cannot cast Blood Flame Blade on it, so better to just leave it at heavy. Now let's cover our Wondrous Physic Mix selection, also very important. First, the Opaline Heart tier, a must-have. It increases all sources of damage negation for 3 minutes, and stacks with pretty much everything else. Once again, you need this if you want to face tank. Second, the Winged Crystal tier, of course, to bypass equipment load, have heavy armor, regardless of your endurance being low. I always get asked this, why my characters have such high equip load. It's because of Winged Crystal tier. 3 minutes is more than enough for any boss. I managed to defeat all bosses in the DLC with the Winged Crystal tier and time to spare. Of course, because this character is stacking all sorts of other defenses, it's not like you necessarily need super heavy armor for normal exploration. For bosses, you'll always have Winged Crystal tier though. What about stuff like Crimson Spear, which increases your hit points? I don't think it's as useful as the Opaline Heart tier. Damage negation is simply much better, especially because of how high enemy damage is for bosses in the DLC. So the higher your damage negation, the less their damage will be. Plus you have enough hit points, higher than 2500 as is. Speaking about hit points, having access to Morgoth's Great Rune is also a must-have, as you to increase your hit points by a massive amount, 25% I believe. This is what makes you go above the classic 1900 from 60 vigor to higher than 2000 of course. You don't really need it for normal exploration, but if you wanna face tank stuff on bosses, it's a really welcome change. This build does let you make a lot of mistakes and still survive, which is why I think Morgoth's Great Rune is good enough, even if you have to reactivate it upon death. I've tested with Malenia, and the hit points recovery is not really as good as having Morgoth's massive bonus to hit points. Perhaps if you're going with Wild Strikes, but I do love having a huge hit points bar. You can of course also use Godric's for the early and mid game. When you combine Godric's with the Grafted Greatsword, you'll have a +10 to all stats, doesn't get any better than that for free. Now let's do a quick section on how to properly buff your character so you can achieve maximum damage and damage negation for true face tanking of course. But I'm planning on soon releasing an updated guide for my how to tank in Elden Ring, including the DLC, so for now I'll try to keep it simple. But anyways, we have 55 physical damage negation, and also 765 on our main weapon attack with 3 blessing. First, activate your Flask of Wondrous Physic as it lasts the longest, for 3 minutes. Then go for Golden Vow, for damage, negation, and extra damage, Blessing's Boon or Bestial Vitality for regeneration, a defensive buff if you want, like Black Flame or another elemental source. After that, activate your Grafted Great Sword for +5 to all stats, then Blood Flame Blade on your Great Stars. You might as well recover FP now, so you have it for your skills. You might eat a Boiled Crab if you want to boost physical damage negation instead of Black Flame. And there we go, we now have 72 negation against physical and 974 weapon damage. If you go for Black Flame, it's 77 against physical, but we reduce your healing, of course. Still, it's close to a 20% increase in damage negation, which, trust me, matters a lot, especially for the DLC where enemies have super high base damage. There are some other damage boosts that will proc, like White Mask and Lord of Blood Exaltation and so on, during battle. Most of these buffs are also decently lasting, the lowest being 30 seconds, the crab, but you can always just eat the crab again during the boss's second phase startup window anyways. And of course, this is just with 3 Scadutree Blessing. You could have way more, well, the higher the amount, up to a maximum of 20, for truly uber damage negation. I only think this is essential for the final boss. The other enemies I did with mostly 3 to 6 and 10 blessing. The final boss though hits so hard that it helps to have maximum blessings, at least for face tanking, of course. Well, alright friends, so this was it for my easiest, most efficient build yet. A face tanking, life stealing, regenerating, critical hit spamming character. If you found this guide useful as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and also consider becoming a channel member if you can. I truly appreciate your support. Thank you for watching and see you next time.